I was stranded on the side of a deserted highway in the Midwest, the sun sinking low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty road. With no cars in sight and no sign of civilization for miles, I felt a growing sense of desperation gnawing at the pit of my stomach. As the hours passed and the sky darkened, I began to worry that I might be stuck out here all night, vulnerable to whatever dangers lurked in the darkness. But just as I was starting to lose hope, the sound of an approaching engine broke through the silence, filling me with a sense of relief. I stuck out my thumb and prayed for the best as the headlights of a truck came into view, growing larger and larger with each passing second. The truck slowed to a stop beside me, and I felt a rush of gratitude towards the driver for offering me a ride. But as I climbed into the cab and settled into the passenger seat, a wave of unease washed over me. There was something about the trucker's demeanor that set off alarm bells in my mind, a sense of menace lurking beneath his friendly smile. I tried to shake off my instincts and focus on the road ahead, but the feeling of unease lingered, growing stronger with each passing mile. I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was that made me so uncomfortable, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in danger. As we drove deeper into the night, the trucker's behavior became increasingly erratic, his laughter growing louder and more manic with each passing minute. I tried to keep up a polite conversation, but his responses grew increasingly nonsensical, leaving me feeling more unsettled than ever. I began to regret ever accepting a ride from this stranger, but there was no turning back now. I was at his mercy, hurtling down the highway at breakneck speed with no idea where we were headed or what he had planned for me. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, the trucker suddenly veered off the highway and onto a deserted dirt road, his eyes glinting with madness as he turned to face me. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized that I was completely at his mercy, alone and vulnerable in the middle of nowhere. I knew that I had to get out of there, to escape from this madman before it was too late. With a surge of adrenaline, I flung open the door and leaped from the truck, hitting the ground running as I sprinted into the darkness. I could hear the trucker's shouts behind me as I fled into the night, his footsteps echoing in the empty air as he pursued me with single-minded determination. But I refused to look back, refused to let fear consume me as I raced towards the safety of civilization. I ran for what felt like hours, my lungs burning and my legs aching with exhaustion, but I refused to stop until I was certain that I was out of danger. And finally, just when I thought I couldn't run another step, I saw the welcoming glow of streetlights ahead, signaling that help was within reach. With one last burst of energy, I pushed myself forward, my heart pounding in my chest as I stumbled into the safety of a nearby gas station. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath as I realized that I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. As I waited for the police to arrive, I couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if I hadn't managed to escape from the trucker's clutches. But one thing was for certain, I would never hitchhike again. I was driving alone on a dark rural road in the Pacific Northwest, the headlights of my car cutting through the thick fog that enveloped the landscape. As I navigated the winding road, my mind wandered to the long drive ahead, eager to reach my destination before the night grew any darker. But just as I was lost in thought, I spotted a figure looming on the side of the road, their silhouette barely visible in the dim glow of my headlights. My heart skipped a beat as I realized it was a hitchhiker, their outstretched thumb a silent plea for help. I hesitated for a moment, torn between my instinct to help a fellow traveler and the nagging sense of unease that gnawed at the back of my mind. But in the end, I couldn't bring myself to leave them stranded in the darkness, vulnerable to whatever dangers lurked in the night. I pulled over to the side of the road and rolled down the window, offering the stranger a ride with a forced smile. They climbed into the passenger seat without a word, their presence sending a shiver down my spine as I pulled back onto the road. As we drove in silence, the tension in the car grew thicker with each passing mile, the only sound the low hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of leaves outside. I stole glances at the hitchhiker out of the corner of my eye, but their expression remained impassive, unreadable in the darkness. I tried to make small talk, to ease the growing sense of unease that weighed heavy in the air, but the hitchhiker's responses were vague and evasive, leaving me feeling more unsettled than ever. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about them, that there was more to their story than they were letting on. As we traveled deeper into the night, the road grew increasingly deserted, the only signs of life the occasional flicker of headlights in the distance. I couldn't help but wonder what had driven the hitchhiker to this lonely stretch of road, what secrets they were hiding beneath their calm exterior. But just as I was lost in thought, the hitchhiker suddenly turned to me with a glint of madness in their eyes, their voice low and menacing as they revealed their true intentions. My blood ran cold as I realized that I was in danger, that I had unwittingly invited a predator into my car. With a surge of adrenaline, I slammed on the brakes and brought the car to a screeching halt, the sound echoing through the night as I flung open the door and leaped from the vehicle. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, my heart pounding in my chest as I fled into the darkness, desperate to escape from the danger that lurked behind me. I could hear the hitchhiker's shouts growing fainter in the distance as I raced towards the safety of civilization, my lungs burning and my muscles screaming with exertion. But I refused to stop until I was certain that I was out of harm's way, until I was safe from whatever horrors awaited me on that desolate road. And finally, just when I thought I couldn't run another step, I saw the welcoming glow of streetlights ahead, signaling that help was within reach. With one last burst of energy, I pushed myself forward, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty as I stumbled into the safety of a nearby gas station. The sun beat down on the barren landscape, casting long shadows across the sand dunes as we drove along the desolate highway. As we cruised down the empty road, we noticed a figure up ahead, standing by the side of the highway with his thumb outstretched. It was a hitchhiker, his face obscured by the glare of the sun. Feeling a sense of compassion, we decided to pull over and offer him a ride. After all, it was a scorching day, and the desert heat could be unforgiving. The hitchhiker climbed into the back seat of our car, offering a polite thank you as he settled in. His demeanor seemed friendly enough, and we struck up a conversation as we continued on our journey. But as the miles stretched on, we began to notice something off about the hitchhiker's behavior. He would shift nervously in his seat, his eyes darting around the car as if he were looking for something. At first, we brushed it off as nerves, attributing his odd behavior to the unfamiliarity of riding with strangers. But as time went on, his actions grew increasingly erratic and unsettling. He would mutter to himself under his breath, his words unintelligible and tinged with paranoia. At one point, he even reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife, holding it in his hands as if preparing for a fight. My partner and I exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to do. We were miles away from civilization, with nothing but desert stretching out in every direction. As the tension in the car mounted, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled over me like a suffocating blanket. The hitchhiker's presence felt like a dark cloud hanging over us, casting a shadow of fear and uncertainty. Desperate to defuse the situation, my partner tried to engage the hitchhiker in conversation, asking him about his life and where he was headed. But his responses were vague and evasive, leaving us with more questions than answers. Suddenly, without warning, the hitchhiker lashed out, his demeanor shifting from uneasy to hostile in an instant. He lunged towards us, brandishing the knife with a wild look in his eyes. Terrified, my partner slammed on the brakes, bringing the car to a screeching halt on the side of the road. We both scrambled out of the car, fleeing into the desert as fast as our legs could carry us. Behind us, we could hear the sound of the hitchhiker's laughter echoing through the desert air, chilling us to the bone. We ran for what felt like hours, our hearts pounding in our chests as we prayed for safety. Finally, exhausted and out of breath, we collapsed onto the sand, the adrenaline draining from our bodies as we huddled together for comfort. It was only then that we realized the true horror of our situation. We were stranded in the desert, with no one around for miles and a dangerous hitchhiker on the loose. With no other options, we huddled together, hoping and praying that someone would come along and rescue us from the nightmare that had become our reality. Just when we thought all hope was lost, the sound of an approaching engine broke through the silence of the desert. We looked up to see headlights cutting through the darkness, illuminating the vast expanse of sand around us. Relief flooded through us as a truck pulled up beside us, its driver rolling down the window to ask if we needed help. We poured out our story in frantic, disjointed sentences, barely able to contain our gratitude as the driver offered us a ride to safety. We climbed into the truck, our hearts still racing with adrenaline as we left the hitchhiker and our abandoned car behind us. As we drove away from the scene of our ordeal, the weight of what had happened began to sink in, leaving us shaken but grateful to be alive. My friends and I were on a road trip, cruising down the highway with the windows down and the music blasting. It was supposed to be a fun adventure, a chance for us to escape the monotony of our everyday lives and explore the open road. As we drove, hunger gnawed at our stomachs, so we decided to pull over at a small diner by the side of the road. The place looked like something out of a movie, a quaint little diner with neon signs flickering in the window and the smell of greasy food wafting through the air. Inside, the diner was dimly lit, with booths lining the walls and a long counter stretching across the room. We took a seat at one of the booths and ordered burgers and fries, eager to fill our empty stomachs. That's when we noticed the two guys sitting at the counter, nursing cups of coffee and staring at us with intense, unwavering gazes. They looked out of place in the cozy atmosphere of the diner, their dark clothes and grim expressions setting them apart from the other patrons. Despite their intimidating appearance, we couldn't help but feel a sense of curiosity about them. So when they approached our table and struck up a conversation, we were intrigued to learn more about who they were and where they were headed. They introduced themselves as Jake and Matt, explaining that they were hitchhiking their way to the next town over. They seemed friendly enough, with easy smiles and relaxed demeanors, so when they asked if we could give them a lift, we agreed without hesitation. But as we drove, things took a strange turn. Jake and Matt's behavior became increasingly erratic, their conversation veering from cheerful small talk to unsettling confessions. They told us about a prank they had pulled on a fellow traveler earlier that day, a harmless joke that had gone horribly wrong. But as they recounted the details, it became clear that there was nothing funny about what they had done. Their laughter turned hollow, their smiles twisted into grimaces as they described the fear and panic they had instilled in their victim. It was chilling to listen to, and I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized the true extent of their depravity. Suddenly, the air in the car felt thick with tension, suffocating us with its weight. My friends and I exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to do or how to react to the darkness that had crept into our midst. But then, just as quickly as it had come, the moment passed. Jake and Matt's laughter died down, and they fell into a tense silence, their eyes fixed on the road ahead. As we approached the next town, my friends and I breathed a sigh of relief, eager to put the encounter behind us and move on with our journey. But as we pulled into the parking lot of the diner, Jake and Matt turned to us with expressions of regret and remorse. They confessed to us that the prank they had pulled earlier had gone horribly wrong, resulting in the death of the unsuspecting traveler. They begged us for forgiveness, their voices trembling with guilt as they pleaded for our help in making things right. My friends and I were stunned into silence, the weight of their words hanging heavy in the air. But despite the fear and uncertainty that gripped us, we knew that we couldn't turn our backs on them in their time of need. So we listened as they laid out their plan to turn themselves into the authorities and accept responsibility for their actions. It was a risky move, one that could change the course of their lives forever, but it was the right thing to do. With heavy hearts, we said our goodbyes to Jake and Matt, watching as they disappeared into the darkness of the night, their figures fading into the distance as they walked away from us and towards their uncertain fate. Hitchhiking through Europe had always been a dream of mine. The idea of freedom and adventure on the open road seemed exhilarating. So, when I found myself stranded on a lonely stretch of highway in the Czech Republic, I didn't hesitate to stick out my thumb and wait for a ride. It wasn't long before a car pulled over, and a charming stranger offered me a lift. He seemed friendly enough, with a disarming smile and easy conversation. I climbed into the passenger seat, grateful for the chance to continue my journey. As we drove, we talked about our travels and shared stories of our adventures. But as the miles passed by, I began to feel a growing sense of unease. There was something off about the way he looked at me, a hunger in his eyes that made my skin crawl. I tried to brush off the feeling, telling myself that I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew that something was seriously wrong. I kept a wary eye on him, trying to gauge his intentions as we continued on our journey. Suddenly, he took a sharp turn off the main road and onto a deserted country lane. Alarm bells rang in my head as I realized that we were heading into the middle of nowhere, far from civilization and help. Panic surged through me as I realized that I had made a dangerous mistake. I knew that I had to get out of the car to escape before it was too late. But as I reached for the door handle, he locked the doors and turned to face me with a sinister grin. I felt a cold chill run down my spine as he reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a knife. My heart pounded in my chest as he brandished the weapon, his eyes filled with malice. I knew that I was in serious danger, that my life was hanging by a thread. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I fought back with all the strength I had, striking out at him with whatever I could find. But he was too strong, too determined to overpower me. I could feel his hands closing around my throat, cutting off my air supply as he pressed the knife against my skin. In that moment, I thought that it was all over, that I would never see my loved ones again. But just when all hope seemed lost, I heard the sound of approaching footsteps outside the car. With a surge of adrenaline, I redoubled my efforts to fight back, kicking and screaming with all the strength I had left. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the struggle was over. The door flew open, and I was pulled from the car by a group of passing motorists who had heard my cries for help. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath as they restrained my attacker and called the police. As I lay there, shaking and trembling with fear, I knew that I had narrowly escaped a terrifying encounter. But as I looked up at the faces of my rescuers, I felt a profound sense of gratitude and relief wash over me. I knew that I was lucky to be alive, that I had been given a second chance at life. And as I was whisked away to safety by the police, I vowed to never take that gift for granted, to always cherish every moment and live each day to the fullest. Alright, so I'm up backpacking, right? Trying to make it to this trailhead before it gets dark. Been hitchhiking for a while, and finally, this pickup truck pulls over. Guy seems friendly enough, so I figure, why not? Save me some time, you know? But as soon as I hop in, something feels off. The guy's got this weird vibe, like he's sizing me up or something. I try to brush it off, but my gut's telling me something's not right. We start driving, and the guy starts asking all these personal questions, like where I'm from, where I'm headed, that sort of thing. I try to keep my answers vague, not wanting to give too much away to a stranger. But then, he starts getting more aggressive, like he's trying to pry information out of me. I start feeling uncomfortable, like I'm being interrogated or something. Then, out of nowhere, he pulls off onto this side road, away from the main highway. My heart's racing now, and I'm starting to panic. I ask him what's going on, but he just grins and tells me to relax. I'm freaking out now, trying to come up with a plan, but before I can do anything, he pulls out a knife and tells me to hand over my wallet. I freeze, not knowing what to do. My mind's racing, trying to figure out how to get out of this alive. I try to reason with him, telling him I don't have much money, but he just laughs and says he's not interested in my cash. He wants something else, something far more sinister. I'm sweating bullets now, trying to stay calm, but inside, I'm terrified. I know I've got to think fast if I want to make it out of this alive. Then, I see my chance. He's distracted for a split second, and I make a run for it, bolting out of the truck and into the woods. I can hear him yelling after me, cursing and threatening to find me. But I don't look back. I keep running, pushing myself to go faster, to get as far away from him as possible. I don't know how long I run for, but eventually, I stumble onto the main road. I flag down a passing car and tell them everything that happened. They call the police, and soon enough, they've got the guy in custody. Turns out, he's been preying on backpackers for years, luring them in with offers of rides and then robbing them, or worse. I count myself lucky to have escaped with my life. But I'll never forget the terror I felt that day, or the narrow escape from a nightmare scenario. So, I'm a college student, right? And I'm hitchhiking home for the holidays. Been looking forward to seeing my family, you know? So, I'm out on the road, thumbing for a ride, when this older couple pulls over. They seem nice enough, so I figure, why not? I hop in the back seat, and they start chatting with me, asking about school and stuff. Seemed harmless at first, just making conversation. But then, they start getting weirdly personal, asking about my plans for the holidays, where my family lives, that sort of thing. I start feeling a bit uncomfortable, but I try to brush it off, not wanting to be rude. As we're driving, I notice the guy keeps glancing at me in the rearview mirror, like he's sizing me up. And the woman's just sitting there, smiling, but there's something off about her smile, something unsettling. Then, we take this turn onto a deserted side road, and my heart starts pounding. I ask them where we're going, but they just laugh and say they're taking a shortcut. But I know something's not right. I can feel it in my gut. So, I start looking for a way out, trying to come up with a plan. But before I can do anything, the guy pulls out a knife and tells me to hand over my wallet. I freeze, my mind going blank. I can't believe this is happening. I try to reason with them, telling them I don't have much money, but they just laugh and say they're not interested in my cash. They want something else, something sinister. I'm terrified now, my heart racing, my hands shaking. I know I've got to do something, but I don't know what. I'm trapped in the back seat with these lunatics, miles from anywhere, with no one around to help me. But then, I see my chance. We come to a stop sign, and the guy's momentarily distracted. I seize the moment, throwing open the door and bolting out of the car. I don't look back. I just run, as fast as I can, as far away from them as possible. I can hear them shouting after me, but I don't stop. I keep running until I can't run anymore. Eventually, I stumble onto the main road, and I flag down a passing car. I tell them what happened, and they call the police. The cops track down the couple, and it turns out they've been preying on hitchhikers for years. I count myself lucky to have escaped with my life. I was driving through the countryside, enjoying the scenic route and the quiet solitude of the open road. It was late afternoon. I had been driving for hours, and the monotony of the road was starting to get to me. As I rounded a bend, I saw someone standing on the side of the road, their thumb stuck out in the universal gesture of hitchhiking. I hesitated for a moment, but then decided to pull over. After all, it was getting late, and it wouldn't hurt to have some company for the rest of the journey. The hitchhiker climbed into the car, offering a grateful smile as they settled into the passenger seat. We exchanged pleasantries, and I learned that their name was Alex. They seemed friendly enough, and we fell into an easy conversation as we drove along. But as we talked, I began to notice something off about Alex. It was subtle at first, just little inconsistencies in their story. They couldn't seem to remember where they were headed, and their answers to my questions seemed evasive. I tried to brush it off, chalking it up to tiredness or nerves. But the feeling of unease continued to gnaw at me, growing stronger with each passing mile. As we drove deeper into the night, the road became increasingly deserted. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Then, out of nowhere, Alex suddenly grew quiet. I glanced over at them, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw the look of fear on their face. They whispered something about seeing headlights in the rearview mirror, but when I checked, there was nothing there. I tried to reassure them, telling them it was probably just another car passing by. But the feeling of dread in the pit of my stomach refused to go away. We continued on in silence, the tension in the car thick enough to cut with a knife. Every shadow seemed to hold some sinister secret, and every sound sent a shiver down my spine. Finally, we reached a gas station, and I pulled into the parking lot with a sense of relief. I turned to Alex to ask if they wanted anything, but they were already gone. I sat there for a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had it all been in my head? Or had I just narrowly escaped a brush with something far more sinister? I may never know for sure, but one thing's for certain, I won't be picking up any more hitchhikers anytime soon. I was a young woman, weary from the weight of my troubled past, seeking solace and escape along a desolate coastal highway. Hitchhiking seemed like my only option, a chance to leave behind the pain and heartache that haunted me at every turn. As I walked along the lonely road, the sound of the crashing waves echoed in the distance, a haunting reminder of the vastness of the ocean and the depths of my despair. I felt vulnerable and exposed, like a lost soul adrift in a sea of uncertainty. But then, a car pulled over to offer me a ride, and I hesitated for only a moment before climbing inside. The driver seemed friendly enough, his smile warm and welcoming as he greeted me with a nod. We exchanged small talk as we drove, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to relax, grateful for the company and the promise of escape. But as we continued along the highway, a sense of unease began to gnaw at the edges of my consciousness. Something about the driver seemed off, his eyes darting nervously in the rearview mirror, his hands gripping the steering wheel with a white-knuckled intensity. I tried to shake off my growing apprehension, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild. But then, the driver took a sudden turn off the main road, veering onto a narrow dirt track that led deep into the surrounding wilderness. Alarm bells sounded in my mind as I realized that something was terribly wrong. I demanded to know where he was taking me, but he just laughed, a cold, mirthless sound that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to open the car door and escape, but it was locked tight, trapping me inside with no way out. Panic surged through me as I realized that I was trapped in a car with a stranger, miles from civilization, with no one around to help me if something went wrong. I searched frantically for a way to escape, but the windows were sealed shut, and the doors refused to budge. The driver's laughter grew louder, more menacing, as he continued to drive deeper into the wilderness, his intentions becoming increasingly clear. I knew then that I was in grave danger, that I had walked into a nightmare from which there might be no escape. But then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I spotted a glimmer of light in the distance, the headlights of another car, heading towards us along the dirt track. With a surge of adrenaline, I seized my chance and screamed for help, pounding on the windows with all my strength. The driver cursed and swerved to avoid the oncoming car, losing control of the vehicle in the process. With a sickening lurch, the car careened off the road and crashed into a tree, sending shards of glass flying in every direction. In the chaos that followed, I managed to wrench open the door and stumble out into the night, my heart pounding in my chest as I fled into the darkness. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of the main road, where I collapsed in exhaustion, my body trembling with fear and adrenaline. I have never totally got over what had happened that day, and I don't think I ever will. I was on a cross-country road trip with my friends. We were cruising down a remote desert highway, enjoying the open road and the vast expanse of the desert landscape. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the sandy terrain. As we drove, we spotted a figure up ahead, waving frantically for help. We slowed down and pulled over, curious to see what was going on. The man looked disheveled and desperate, like he'd been stranded out in the desert for days. He told us his car had broken down miles back and he had been walking for hours, trying to find help. He seemed genuinely grateful when we offered him a ride. We hesitated for a moment, but ultimately decided to let him in. As he climbed into the back seat, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him. He had a strange intensity in his eyes, like he was sizing us up, assessing us in some way. We continued down the highway, making small talk with the stranger as we drove. But the conversation soon took a dark turn. He started asking us personal questions, probing into our lives in a way that made us uncomfortable. Then, out of nowhere, he began telling us stories, horrible stories of people who had disappeared in the desert, never to be seen again. He spoke in a calm, matter-of-fact tone, as if recounting events that had actually happened. I felt a chill run down my spine as I listened to his tales of death and despair. It was like something out of a nightmare, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were in danger. As the darkness closed in around us, I realized that we were completely isolated out here in the desert. There was no one around for miles, and our only company was this mysterious stranger in the back seat. I glanced nervously at my friends, silently communicating my fear. But we were all thinking the same thing: how do we get out of this situation? Suddenly, the man's demeanor changed. He grew agitated, his voice rising as he spoke. He accused us of being naive, of trusting him so easily. He said we were fools to pick up a stranger on the side of the road. I could feel the tension in the car mounting, and I knew we had to act fast. We needed to get rid of this guy before things got out of hand. I looked at the GPS, searching for the nearest town or gas station where we could drop him off. But to my horror, there was nothing but empty desert for miles in every direction. Panic set in as I realized we were completely at this man's mercy. We were at his mercy, stranded in the middle of nowhere with no way out. But then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, we saw lights up ahead, a small gas station nestled on the edge of the highway. It was like a beacon in the darkness, a sign that we might actually make it out of this alive. We pulled into the gas station, our hearts pounding with relief. The man got out of the car without a word, disappearing into the night without so much as a backward glance. As we drove away from the gas station, the tension in the car began to dissipate. We were safe now, back on the open road with nothing but the desert and the stars stretching out before us. But as I looked out into the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something truly sinister. I'm cruising through the mountains, just trying to enjoy the scenery, you know? But then I see this guy on the side of the road, thumb out, looking kinda lost. Normally, I wouldn't pick up hitchhikers, but there's something about him that tugs at my heartstrings. So, I pull over and ask if he needs a ride. He hesitates for a moment, then nods gratefully and hops in. He's got this haunted look in his eyes, like he's seen things no one should ever see. We start driving, and at first, it's all small talk. I ask him where he's headed, what brings him out to the mountains. But he's cagey, dodging my questions with vague answers. I try to shake off the feeling of unease creeping over me, but it's like a weight pressing down on my chest. There's something off about this guy, something he's not telling me. As we wind our way through the mountains, I can't shake the feeling that we're being watched. Every shadow seems to hide something sinister. Every rustle of leaves sends shivers down my spine. I glance over at him, and he's staring out the window, lost in thought. But there's this tension in the air, like something's about to snap. I try to make conversation, hoping to break the silence and ease the tension. But he's distant, lost in his own thoughts. Suddenly, he turns to me, his eyes wide with fear. He starts babbling about how he's running from something he can't escape. I try to calm him down, but he's frantic, his words tumbling out in a rush. I can feel my heart pounding in my chest as I listen to his story. He's been through hell and back, and now he's on the run, trying to stay one step ahead of whatever's chasing him. I don't know what to do. I want to help him, but I'm scared too. Scared of what he's brought into my car, scared of what might happen if we don't get away fast. I step on the gas, pushing the car to its limits as we race through the mountains. But no matter how fast we go, I can't shake the feeling that something's closing in on us. He's watching me now, his eyes wild with fear. He knows we're in danger, knows we might not make it out alive. But we keep driving, pushing through the darkness, hoping against hope that we'll find a way out of this nightmare. And then, just when it feels like we're about to hit a dead end, we see it. A light in the distance, shining like a beacon in the night. Relief floods through me as I realize it's a small town, a safe haven from whatever's been chasing us. I press harder on the gas pedal, my heart racing as we approach. We pull into the town, and I can't help but let out a shaky breath of relief. People mill about, going about their business, completely unaware of the terror we've just escaped. I drop him off at a diner, promising to keep him safe until we figure out our next move. He thanks me, his eyes still haunted, but there's a glimmer of hope in them now. I watch him go, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. We made it out alive, against all odds. As I drive away, I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over, that whatever's been chasing him is still out there, lurking in the shadows. I stood on the side of the deserted highway, my thumb outstretched in a silent plea for a ride. It had been hours since I'd last seen another car, and the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty road. Just when I was beginning to lose hope, a truck rumbled into view, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a beacon of salvation. I watched as it slowed to a stop beside me, the driver's face obscured by the glare of the headlights. Without a word, I climbed into the cab beside him, grateful for the warmth and safety of the vehicle. The trucker's eyes flickered over me briefly before returning to the road ahead, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the cab. As we traveled together, the silence between us grew heavy with unspoken tension, the only sound the low hum of the engine and the occasional rumble of tires on asphalt. I stole glances at the trucker out of the corner of my eye, but his gaze remained fixed on the road ahead, his hands tight on the steering wheel. But just as I was beginning to relax into the rhythm of the road, the trucker turned to me with a glint of madness in his eyes, his voice low and menacing as he revealed his true intentions. My blood ran cold as I realized that I was in danger, that I had unwittingly invited a predator into my midst. With a surge of adrenaline, I lunged for the door and flung it open, the rush of cold air hitting me like a slap in the face as I tumbled from the cab and onto the side of the road. I scrambled to my feet and ran as fast as my legs could carry me, my heart pounding in my chest as I fled into the darkness. Behind me, I could hear the trucker's shouts growing fainter with each passing second, his threats lost in the roar of the wind and the pounding of my own heartbeat. But I refused to look back, refused to let fear consume me as I raced towards the safety of civilization. And finally, just when I thought I couldn't run another step, I saw the welcoming glow of streetlights ahead, signaling that help was within reach. With one last burst of energy, I pushed myself forward, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty as I stumbled into the safety of a nearby town. As I waited for the police to arrive, I couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if I hadn't managed to escape from the trucker. I'm out there, hitchhiking through the countryside, trying to get to where I need to go before it gets dark. It's quiet, peaceful, but there's this nagging feeling in the back of my mind, telling me I should be more careful. Then, this car pulls over, and I figure, hey, why not? It's getting late, and I could use a ride. So, I hop in, grateful for the lift. But as soon as I'm in the car, something feels off. The guy behind the wheel, he's got this look in his eyes, like he's sizing me up, assessing me. I try to brush it off, but my gut's telling me something's not right. I start to feel uneasy, like I've made a mistake getting in this car. We start driving, and at first, it's all small talk. I try to keep things light, but he's distant, aloof, like he's got something on his mind. Then, out of nowhere, he pulls out a gun, pointing it at me with this cold, dead look in his eyes. My heart stops, my breath catches in my throat. I try to stay calm, but inside, I'm panicking. I know I've got to think fast if I want to get out of this alive. I start talking, trying to distract him, to buy myself some time. I tell him anything that comes to mind, hoping he'll lower the gun, even for just a moment. And then, just when I'm about to lose hope, he hesitates. It's only for a split second, but it's all I need. I lunge for the door, throwing it open and diving out of the car. I hit the ground hard, rolling away as fast as I can, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. I hear him shouting after me, cursing and threatening, but I don't look back. I just keep running, pushing myself to go faster, to get as far away from him as I can. I don't know how long I run for, but eventually, I stumble onto the main road. I flag down a passing car and tell them everything that happened. They call the police, and soon enough, they've got the guy in custody. Turns out, he's been preying on hitchhikers for years, luring them in with offers of rides and then robbing them, or worse. I count myself lucky to have escaped with my life. But I'll never forget the terror I felt that day. I was driving alone through the desert, the endless expanse of sand stretching out before me like a vast ocean of nothingness. The sun beat down mercilessly, casting harsh shadows across the barren landscape. My air conditioner was struggling to keep up with the heat, but I kept pushing forward, eager to reach my destination. As I drove, I saw a figure up ahead, standing by the side of the road with their thumb out. A hitchhiker. Normally, I wouldn't pick up strangers, but there was something about this person that drew me in. Maybe it was the way they stood perfectly still, their gaze fixed on me as if they had been waiting for me specifically. I slowed down and rolled down the window, offering them a ride. They nodded silently and climbed into the passenger seat, their presence sending a shiver down my spine. There was something off about them, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. We drove in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional gust of wind. I stole glances at the hitchhiker out of the corner of my eye, trying to decipher what it was that made them so unsettling. Eventually, I mustered up the courage to strike up a conversation. I asked them where they were headed, but they just shrugged and mumbled something about needing to get away. Their voice sent a chill down my spine, low and raspy like sandpaper. I tried to ignore the feeling of unease creeping over me as we continued on our journey. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the desert, the hitchhiker grew increasingly agitated. They fidgeted in their seat, their eyes darting around as if searching for something unseen. I asked them if everything was okay, but they just stared straight ahead, their expression unreadable. I wanted to pull over and kick them out of my car, but something held me back, a nagging feeling that I couldn't ignore. Suddenly, without warning, the hitchhiker turned to me with a wild look in their eyes. They grabbed the steering wheel, sending the car careening off the road and into the sand. I screamed as we spun out of control, the world around us a blur of motion and chaos. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The car came to a stop, battered and broken but miraculously still intact. I sat there in shock, trying to catch my breath as the hitchhiker climbed out of the car and disappeared into the darkness. I wanted to follow them, to demand answers, but something told me it was better to just get as far away from them as possible. I started the car and drove off into the night, my heart pounding in my chest as I left the nightmare behind me. Alright, so, I'm hitchhiking along this busy freeway, trying to put as much distance between me and what I've done as possible. Got this heavy weight in my backpack, a reminder of the dark secret I'm carrying. I'm desperate to get away, to escape the consequences of my actions. So, when a car pulls over to offer me a ride, I see it as an opportunity, a chance to disappear into the crowd. I hop in, trying to act casual, like I'm just another traveler trying to get to his destination. But inside, I'm a mess, my mind racing with guilt and fear. The driver seems friendly enough, making small talk as we drive. But I can't shake the feeling that he's onto me, that he knows what I've done. I try to keep my cool, but the tension in the air is palpable. Every passing minute feels like an eternity, like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then, just when I think I've made it out, he pulls off onto a deserted side road, away from prying eyes. My heart sinks as I realize what's about to happen. He turns to me, his eyes cold and calculating, and I know I've been caught. I try to plead with him, to convince him to let me go, but he's not having it. He pulls out a gun, pointing it at me with a steady hand. I can feel the blood drain from my face as I realize just how much trouble I'm in. I try to think fast, to come up with a plan, but my mind's a blank. All I can do is sit there, frozen in fear, as he lays out his demands. I know I should fight back, should try to escape, but I'm paralyzed by fear. All I can do is pray for a miracle, for someone to come along and save me from this nightmare. But deep down, I know it's hopeless. I'm trapped at the mercy of a man with a gun and a grudge. Hours pass, but it feels like an eternity. Every second feels like a lifetime, like I'm living in some twisted version of reality. And then, just when I think I can't take it anymore, I hear the sound of approaching sirens. Relief floods through me as I realize help is finally on the way. The police arrive, guns drawn, and the driver is taken into custody without a fight. I'm safe, for now, but the scars of that day will never fully heal. I'm writing this from jail now, serving time for my crimes. It's a small price to pay for the lives I've ruined, for the pain I've caused. And as I sit here, alone with my thoughts, I can't help but wonder what might have been if I'd made different choices. I was driving home from a long day at work, tired and eager to relax. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty road. I noticed a figure standing at the side of the road, thumb outstretched, hitchhiking. He had a charming smile, his teeth gleaming in the fading light. I hesitated for a moment, but then decided to pull over and offer him a ride. As he climbed into the passenger seat, he introduced himself as Alex. He seemed friendly enough, and we exchanged small talk as we drove. He told me he was heading to a nearby town, just a few miles off the main road. But then, he suggested we take a detour through the back roads, claiming it would be a shortcut. I hesitated, but his smile was so reassuring, and I found myself agreeing. As we turned off the main road onto the narrow dirt path, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me. The trees closed in around us, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers in the darkness. Alex's chatter became increasingly erratic, and I started to regret my decision to pick him up. But when I tried to turn around, I realized we were surrounded by dense forest on all sides. There was no way out. As we drove deeper into the woods, I became acutely aware of how isolated we were. There were no other cars on the road, no signs of civilization anywhere. It was just me and Alex, alone in the darkness. Suddenly, Alex turned to me with a glint in his eye that sent shivers down my spine. He asked if I had any family, any loved ones waiting for me at home. His smile had turned sinister, his charming facade slipping away to reveal something cold and calculating beneath. I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked him to clarify what he meant, but he just laughed, a sound that echoed eerily through the empty forest. Panic began to rise within me as I realized I was in grave danger. I knew I had to get out of there, but every time I tried to turn around, Alex would calmly steer me back onto the narrow path, his grip on the wheel like iron. I felt like a trapped animal, with nowhere to run and no one to hear my cries for help. Hours seemed to pass as we drove deeper into the wilderness, the darkness pressing in on us from all sides. I could feel Alex's eyes on me, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw a break in the trees up ahead. It was a clearing, a small patch of moonlit grass bathed in silver light. Without hesitation, I slammed on the brakes and threw open the door, scrambling out into the night. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, my heart pounding in my chest. Behind me, I heard Alex's laughter echoing through the forest, taunting me, urging me to come back. But I didn't stop until I reached the safety of the main road, where I collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. As I looked back at the darkened woods, I knew I was lucky to be alive. I was driving down a deserted highway, the road stretching out endlessly before me like a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the barren landscape. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty expanse of desert. As I rounded a bend in the road, I saw him, a lone figure standing by the side of the highway, his thumb extended in a silent plea for help. He looked desperate, his clothes tattered and his face streaked with dirt and sweat. Feeling a twinge of sympathy, I pulled over to the side of the road and rolled down the window. The hitchhiker approached the car, his eyes wide with desperation as he pleaded for a ride to the nearest town. I hesitated for a moment, weighing the risks of picking up a stranger on a deserted highway at night. But then I thought of how I would feel if I were in his shoes, stranded and alone with no one to turn to for help. So I unlocked the doors and motioned for him to climb in, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched him settle into the passenger seat beside me. He muttered his thanks, his voice hoarse and shaky with exhaustion. As we drove, I tried to make conversation, asking him where he was headed and what had brought him out to this desolate stretch of highway. But his responses were vague and evasive, as if he were hiding something from me. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me like a dark cloud, casting a shadow of doubt over the decision to give this stranger a ride. But I pushed aside my doubts, telling myself that I was just being paranoid. But as we neared the outskirts of town, the hitchhiker's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He would mutter to himself under his breath, his eyes darting around the car as if he were searching for something or someone. Suddenly, without warning, he turned to me with a wild look in his eyes, his voice low and menacing as he confessed to me the true reason for his desperate plea for a ride. He told me about the terrible crime he had committed, a violent act born out of desperation and despair. He spoke of the guilt and remorse that weighed heavy on his soul, driving him to seek redemption at any cost. I felt a chill run down my spine as his words sank in, the reality of the situation hitting me like a ton of bricks. I was alone in a car with a dangerous criminal, miles away from help or safety. But even as fear threatened to consume me, a sense of determination took hold. I knew that I had to do whatever it took to get out of this situation alive, to protect myself and ensure that justice was served. So I feigned calm, nodding along with his words as I plotted my escape. And when we finally reached the outskirts of town, I seized my chance, slamming on the brakes and throwing open the door before he had a chance to react. I sprinted away from the car, my heart pounding in my chest as I ran as fast as my legs could carry me. Behind me, I could hear the sound of the hitchhiker's footsteps echoing on the pavement, his shouts of rage and frustration filling the night air. But I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of the nearest gas station, where I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath and shaking with adrenaline. It was only then, as I sat there in the harsh glow of the fluorescent lights, that I realized the true horror of what had just happened. I had narrowly escaped a brush with death, encounter with a desperate hitchhiker that could have ended in tragedy. But I was alive, and for that, I was grateful. And as I sat there, catching my breath and trying to make sense of the chaos that had just unfolded, I vowed never to pick up another hitchhiker again. It was a stormy night, the kind that makes you want to stay indoors and avoid the outside world at all costs. But I had to drive through the countryside, and as I navigated the winding roads, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease creeping over me. As I rounded a bend, I saw a figure standing by the side of the road, soaked to the bone and holding out a thumb in hopes of catching a ride. Without thinking, I pulled over and rolled down the window, offering the stranger a lift. He climbed into the passenger seat, a grateful smile on his face as he thanked me for stopping. He seemed harmless enough, with a disarming smile and easy conversation. But as we drove on, I began to sense that something was off about him. There was a darkness in his eyes, a hardness that made me uneasy. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself that I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew that something was seriously wrong. As the rain pounded against the windshield and the wind howled outside, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled over me like a heavy blanket. I kept stealing glances at the stranger sitting next to me, trying to gauge his intentions. Suddenly, he turned to me with a sinister smile and asked if I could pull over so he could relieve himself. Alarm bells rang in my head as I realized that I had made a grave mistake by letting this dangerous stranger into my car. But before I could react, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a knife, pressing it against my throat with a menacing grin. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized that I was in serious danger, that my life was hanging by a thread. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I fought back with all the strength I had, struggling to wrestle the knife away from him. But he was too strong, too determined to overpower me. I could feel the cold steel of the blade digging into my skin, the sharp pain shooting through me like a bolt of lightning. I knew that I had to do something, to find a way to escape before it was too late. With a surge of desperation, I slammed on the brakes and swerved the car to the side of the road, hoping to throw him off balance and give myself a chance to escape. But he was one step ahead of me, anticipating my every move. As the car skidded to a stop, he lunged at me with the knife, his eyes filled with malice. But just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I saw a pair of headlights approaching from the distance. With a burst of adrenaline, I flung open the door and bolted from the car, racing towards the oncoming vehicle with all the strength I had left. I could hear the stranger hot on my heels, his footsteps echoing through the darkness. But just as he closed in on me, the headlights washed over us, revealing the scene to the driver, who slammed on the brakes and jumped out of the car, shouting for help. With a surge of relief, I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath as the stranger was restrained and taken into custody by the police. And as I lay there, shaking and trembling with fear, I knew that I had narrowly escaped a terrifying encounter. But as I was whisked away to safety by the police, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that lingered in the air. I knew that I would never forget the horror of that night, the terror of staring death in the face and somehow managing to survive. But despite the trauma of the experience, I was grateful to be alive, to have a second chance at life. I remember that night like it was yesterday. I was driving down this deserted road, feeling tired but determined to reach my destination. The headlights of my car cut through the darkness, casting long shadows on the empty stretch of highway. That's when I saw him, standing by the side of the road, his thumb outstretched in the universal sign of a hitchhiker. At first, I hesitated. It wasn't exactly common to pick up strangers in the middle of nowhere, especially not at that time of night. But something about him seemed off, like he was desperate or maybe just lost. Against my better judgment, I slowed down and rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He nodded eagerly, a grateful smile spreading across his face. "Thanks, man. I really appreciate it." As he climbed into the passenger seat, I couldn't help but notice how his eyes darted around nervously, like he was expecting trouble. I chalked it up to paranoia and focused on the road ahead. We didn't talk much at first, just exchanged the usual pleasantries. But as the miles passed by, he started to open up. He told me his name was Jack, that he was traveling cross-country to visit family. Seemed like a nice enough guy, but there was something about him that set my teeth on edge. It wasn't until we were miles away from civilization that things started to get weird. Jack suddenly asked me to pull over, claiming he needed to take a leak. I obliged, pulling off onto the shoulder of the road and watching as he disappeared into the darkness. But he didn't come back. Minutes ticked by, turning into what felt like hours. I started to get nervous, wondering if I should go after him or just drive away and leave him behind. But before I could make up my mind, he emerged from the shadows, a strange look in his eyes. "Sorry about that," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "I just needed to make a phone call." I didn't buy it for a second, but I didn't press the issue. I just wanted to get back on the road and put as much distance between us as possible. But then he started asking strange questions, like if I lived alone or if I had any weapons in the car. Alarm bells started going off in my head, but I tried to play it cool, pretending like everything was fine. That's when he dropped the bombshell. He told me he had a gun, that he was planning on robbing me and taking my car. My heart practically stopped in my chest as I realized I was alone in the middle of nowhere with a dangerous criminal. I tried to think fast, to come up with a plan to get out of this alive. But before I could do anything, he lunged at me, his hands reaching for my throat. I fought back with everything I had, my adrenaline pumping as I struggled to overpower him. In the end, it was sheer luck that saved me. I managed to grab hold of the steering wheel and yank it to the side, sending us careening off the road and into a ditch. The impact knocked us both senseless, but when I came to, I knew I had to get out of there before he came to his senses. I stumbled out of the wreckage and ran as fast as I could, not stopping until I reached the nearest town and found help. It was only then that I realized just how close I had come to death, and how lucky I was to have escaped with my life. To this day, I can't shake the feeling of terror that washed over me that night. It was a chilling reminder of just how fragile life can be. I was driving along a lonely stretch of highway. That's when I saw him, standing on the side of the road with his thumb outstretched in a silent plea for a ride. There was something about him that gave me pause, a haunted look in his eyes that sent a shiver down my spine. But against my better judgment, I slowed to a stop beside him and rolled down the window, the cold night air rushing in to fill the space between us. Without a word, he climbed into the passenger seat beside me, his eyes fixed on the road ahead with a distant look in his eyes. As we traveled together, the silence between us grew heavy with unspoken tension, the only sound the low hum of the engine and the occasional whisper of the wind outside. I stole glances at him out of the corner of my eye, but his gaze remained fixed on the road ahead, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the cab. But just as I was beginning to relax into the rhythm of the road, he turned to me with a look of quiet desperation in his eyes, his voice low and urgent as he spoke of his dark past. I listened in growing horror as he recounted tales of violence and betrayal, his words painting a chilling picture of a life lived on the edge of sanity. With each passing mile, I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me, the darkness of his past casting a long shadow over our journey. I wanted to ask him to leave, to get out of my car and disappear into the night, but something held me back, some primal instinct that told me I needed to keep him close, to protect him from whatever demons haunted his past. But as we neared our destination, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in danger, that I had unwittingly invited a predator into my midst. With a surge of adrenaline, I made up my mind to confront him, to demand answers to the questions that had been gnawing at me since the moment he stepped into my car. But before I could speak, he turned to me with a haunted look in his eyes, his voice barely above a whisper as he confessed to the sins of his past. I listened in stunned silence as he spoke of the lives he had destroyed, the pain and suffering he had caused in his quest for redemption. And as the truth of his words sank in, I realized that I was in the presence of a true monster, a man capable of unspeakable acts of cruelty and violence. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I knew that I needed to get away from him, to put as much distance between us as possible before it was too late. With trembling hands, I reached for the door and flung it open, the rush of cold air hitting me like a slap in the face as I stumbled from the car and onto the side of the road. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, my heart pounding in my chest as I fled into the darkness, away from the man who had haunted my nightmares ever since that fateful night on the highway. And as I looked back over my shoulder, I saw him standing there in the glow of the headlights, his eyes fixed on me with a look of quiet resignation. But I didn't stop running, didn't look back as I disappeared into the night. I was driving down a deserted road, the headlights of my car cutting through the darkness like a knife. It was late, and I was tired, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me like a heavy blanket. And then I saw him, standing on the side of the road with his thumb outstretched in a silent plea for a ride. Without thinking, I slowed to a stop and rolled down the window, the cold night air rushing in to fill the space between us. He climbed into the passenger seat without a word, his eyes fixed on the road ahead with a distant look in his eyes. I tried to make small talk, to break the ice and ease the tension that hung heavy in the air, but he remained silent, his gaze fixed on some unseen point in the distance. I stole glances at him out of the corner of my eye, but his expression remained unreadable, his features obscured by the dim light of the car's interior. As we traveled together, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him, that there was something lurking beneath the surface that he wasn't telling me. I tried to push the thought from my mind, to focus on the road ahead and ignore the growing sense of unease that gnawed at the pit of my stomach. But then he spoke, his voice low and urgent as he described his plans in chilling detail. I listened in growing horror as he outlined his gruesome intentions, his words sending a shiver down my spine. I wanted to pull over and kick him out of the car, to get as far away from him as possible, but something held me back, some primal instinct that told me I needed to keep him close, to protect myself from whatever darkness lurked within him. With each passing mile, his behavior grew more erratic, his words more disturbing. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end as he spoke, the sense of dread building in the pit of my stomach with each passing moment. I wanted to scream, to run as far away as possible, but I was trapped in the confines of the car, at the mercy of the man sitting beside me. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a knife, the blade glinting in the dim light of the car's interior. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the weapon, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. I knew that I needed to get away from him, to escape before it was too late, but I was frozen in place, paralyzed by the terror that gripped me. But then, with a surge of adrenaline, I made up my mind to act. With trembling hands, I reached for the door and flung it open, the rush of cold air hitting me like a slap in the face as I stumbled from the car and onto the side of the road. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, my heart pounding in my chest as I fled into the darkness, away from the man who had nearly become my killer. Out of the darkness, I saw him, a lone figure standing on the side of the road, his silhouette barely visible through the driving rain. Without thinking, I slowed to a stop and rolled down the window, offering him a ride to shelter from the storm. He climbed into the passenger seat with a grateful nod, his clothes soaked through and his hair plastered to his scalp. As we traveled together, I tried to make small talk, to ease the tension that hung heavy in the air. But he remained silent, his eyes fixed on some distant point in the darkness outside. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him, that there was something lurking beneath the surface that he wasn't telling me. And then, as we rounded a bend in the road, he turned to me with a look of quiet desperation in his eyes. He spoke in a low voice, his words filled with a sense of urgency as he described his troubled past and the dangers that lurked in the darkness. I listened in growing horror as he outlined his plans, his words sending a chill down my spine. I wanted to pull over and kick him out of the car, to get as far away from him as possible. But something held me back, some nagging doubt that whispered in the back of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into something dark and dangerous, something that I couldn't escape. As the miles passed, his behavior grew more erratic, his words more disturbing. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end as he spoke, the sense of dread building in the pit of my stomach with each passing moment. I wanted to scream, to run as far away as possible. But I was trapped in the confines of the car, at the mercy of the man sitting beside me. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a knife, the blade glinting in the dim light of the car's interior. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the weapon, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. I knew that I needed to get away from him, to escape before it was too late. With trembling hands, I reached for the door and flung it open, a rush of cold air hitting me like a slap in the face as I stumbled from the car and onto the side of the road. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, my heart pounding in my chest as I fled into the darkness, away from the man who had nearly become my killer. Driving down a lonely stretch of road on a moonless night, I spotted a figure on the side of the road, thumb outstretched in search of a ride. Without much thought, I pulled over and rolled down the window, offering the stranger a lift. He climbed into the passenger seat, thanking me with a charming smile. As we drove on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him. There was a glint in his eyes, a cunning intelligence that sent shivers down my spine. But I pushed aside my unease, chalking it up to paranoia. As we exchanged small talk, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was sizing me up, probing for weaknesses. I tried to brush off the feeling, focusing on the road ahead. But as the miles passed by, I began to feel a growing sense of unease. There was something about the way he watched me, a predatory gleam in his eyes that made my skin crawl. Suddenly, he turned to me with a smirk and suggested we play a game to pass the time. I hesitated, unsure of what he had in mind, but curiosity got the better of me and I agreed. Little did I know, I was about to be sucked into a deadly game of cat and mouse. As we played, I quickly realized that he was no ordinary hitchhiker. He was cunning, with a mind like a steel trap, always one step ahead of me. I felt a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach as I realized that I was in over my head. With each passing mile, the stakes grew higher, the tension mounting as we raced towards an uncertain fate. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, like a predator sizing up its prey. But I refused to back down, determined to outwit him and escape with my life. As the game wore on, I began to feel the walls closing in around me, the darkness of the night pressing in on all sides. I knew that I had to stay alert, to keep my wits about me if I had any hope of surviving this deadly encounter. But just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I spotted a glimmer of light on the horizon, the promise of safety beckoning me towards it. With renewed determination, I pushed on, refusing to give up until I had reached the end of the road. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached our destination, the end of the road stretching out before us like a beacon of hope. With a surge of adrenaline, I slammed on the brakes and leapt from the car, racing towards the safety of the nearest town. But just as I thought I was in the clear, he lunged at me with a knife, his eyes filled with malice. With lightning reflexes, I dodged out of the way, sending him crashing to the ground. Without a second thought, I sprinted towards the safety of the town, my heart pounding in my chest as I ran for my life. As I reached the outskirts of town, I looked back one last time. The memory of our deadly game burned into my mind forever. As I navigated the slick roads, I saw a figure on the side of the road, huddled under a flimsy umbrella, thumb outstretched in search of a ride. Without much thought, I pulled over and rolled down the window, offering the stranger a lift. He climbed into the passenger seat, his clothes drenched from the rain, and thanked me with a weary smile. As we drove on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him. There was a tension in the air, a sense of unease that settled over me like a heavy blanket. But I pushed aside my doubts, telling myself that I was just being paranoid. After all, he was just a hitchhiker in need of help. As we exchanged small talk, I tried to put my unease aside and focus on the road ahead. But the feeling of dread lingered, gnawing at the edges of my consciousness. There was something about him that didn't sit right with me, something lurking beneath the surface. Suddenly, he turned to me with a strange glint in his eyes and asked if I could pull over so he could use the restroom. I hesitated, unsure of whether to trust him, but eventually relented and pulled into a deserted rest stop. As he stepped out of the car, I couldn't shake the feeling of foreboding that washed over me. I watched him disappear into the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for him to return. But as the minutes ticked by and he failed to reappear, a sense of unease settled over me like a heavy weight. I knew that something was seriously wrong, that I had made a grave mistake by letting him into my car. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I stepped out of the car and called out for him, my voice echoing through the empty night. But there was no response, no sign of him anywhere. Panic began to rise within me as I realized that I was alone in the darkness, stranded in the middle of nowhere with a stranger who could be anywhere. With trembling hands, I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911, praying that help would arrive soon. As I waited for the police to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that he was out there somewhere, lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. But despite the terror coursing through my veins, I knew that I had to stay strong, to hold on to hope until help arrived. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sound of approaching sirens broke through the silence, and I breathed a sigh of relief as the police pulled up alongside me. With trembling hands, I told them everything that had happened, praying that they would be able to find him before it was too late. Hours passed as the police searched the area, combing through the darkness in search of any sign of the hitchhiker. But despite their best efforts, he remained elusive, disappearing into the night without a trace. As the sun rose on a new day, I felt a sense of relief wash over me, knowing that I had escaped a potentially deadly encounter. But the memory of that night would haunt me forever, a reminder of the dangers that lurked in the darkness, waiting to pounce on unsuspecting victims. And as I drove away from that lonely stretch of road, I vowed to never pick up another hitchhiker again, knowing all too well the risks that came with offering a helping hand to strangers in need. I could barely see through the downpour, the darkness of the night swallowing up the road ahead. Suddenly, I spotted a figure on the side of the road, huddled under a tree to shield themselves from the storm. Without much thought, I pulled over and rolled down the window, offering the stranger a lift. They climbed into the passenger seat, their clothes drenched and clinging to their skin. I could barely make out their features in the dim light of the car, but something about them sent a shiver down my spine. Ignoring my unease, I asked where they were headed, and they mumbled something about needing to get out of the rain. As we drove on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about them. There was a coldness in their eyes, a distance that made me uneasy. But I pushed aside my misgivings, chalking it up to paranoia. As we exchanged small talk, I couldn't help but notice how their gaze lingered on me, like they were studying me, sizing me up. I tried to ignore the feeling of discomfort that crept over me, focusing instead on the road ahead. But as the miles passed by, I began to feel a growing sense of unease. There was something about the way they looked at me, a hunger in their eyes that sent alarm bells ringing in my mind. I tried to brush off my fears, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. As we continued our journey, I began to feel weaker, more lethargic, as if something was draining the energy from me. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it only grew stronger with each passing mile. Suddenly, the hitchhiker turned to me with a hungry look in their eyes, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Without warning, they lunged at me, sinking their teeth into my neck with a ferocity that sent shockwaves of pain shooting through my body. I tried to fight them off, but they were too strong, their grip like iron around my throat. I could feel my strength ebbing away, my vision growing dim as they fed on my blood. But just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I summoned the last of my strength and managed to push them away. With a desperate cry, I stumbled out of the car and into the pouring rain, gasping for breath as I collapsed onto the wet pavement. As I lay there, bleeding and battered, I watched in horror as the hitchhiker transformed before my eyes, their features contorting into something monstrous and inhuman. With a final, chilling laugh, they disappeared into the night, leaving me alone and broken on the side of the road. But despite the terror of that night, I knew that I had survived, escaped from the clutches of a creature far more dangerous than I could ever have imagined. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the deserted highway as I drove through the darkness. It was a lonely stretch of road, with nothing but miles of empty asphalt stretching out before me. As I rounded a bend, I saw him standing by the side of the road, a lone figure illuminated by the pale light of the moon. He was a hitchhiker, his silhouette outlined against the darkness as he raised his thumb in a silent plea for a ride. I hesitated for a moment, my instincts telling me to keep driving and leave him behind. But there was something about him that drew me in, a sense of otherworldly charm that I couldn't ignore. So I pulled over to the side of the road and motioned for him to climb in, a smile playing at the corners of his lips as he settled into the passenger seat beside me. As we drove, we talked, the conversation flowing easily between us as if we were old friends. He had a way with words, a charm that was impossible to resist, and before long, I found myself captivated by his every word. But as the miles stretched on, I began to notice something strange about the hitchhiker. His eyes seemed to glint with an unnatural light, and there was a darkness lurking behind his smile that sent a shiver down my spine. Still, I brushed aside my doubts, telling myself that I was just being paranoid. After all, he was just a hitchhiker, a stranger on the side of the road with nowhere else to turn. But as we neared our destination, his behavior grew increasingly erratic. He would mutter to himself under his breath, his words nonsensical and tinged with madness. And then, without warning, he turned to me with a look of pure malice in his eyes, his voice low and menacing as he confessed to me the true nature of his identity. He was not just a hitchhiker, he told me. He was something more, something ancient and powerful that had walked the earth since the beginning of time. I felt a chill run down my spine as his words sank in, the reality of the situation hitting me like a ton of bricks. I was alone in a car with a creature of darkness, miles away from help or safety. But even as fear threatened to consume me, a sense of determination took hold. I knew that I had to do whatever it took to survive, to escape from the clutches of this otherworldly being before it was too late. So I waited for my moment, biding my time until the opportune moment presented itself. And when it finally did, I seized my chance, slamming on the brakes and throwing open the door before he had a chance to react. I ran, my heart pounding in my chest as I fled into the night, the sound of his laughter echoing in my ears as I disappeared into the darkness. But I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of the nearest town, where I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath and shaking with adrenaline. It was only then, as I sat there in the harsh glow of the streetlights, that I realized the true horror of what had just happened. I had narrowly escaped a brush with death, encounter with a creature of darkness that could have ended in tragedy. But I was alive, and for that, I was grateful.